The judgment chamber stretched across the darkness of space like a wound in the stars. It was the largest structure ever built by living hands. 3,000 species had contributed to its construction over 10 million years. Its crystalline walls held the weight of 1 billion decisions. And today, those walls would witness something that had never happened before. Ambassador David Cole stood at the center of the chamber floor. He was alone. Above him, arranged in endless tiers that disappeared into shadow, sat the representatives of 742 civilizations. Some were giants with bodies of stone. Others were clouds of living light. A few existed in dimensions that human eyes could barely perceive. All of them were looking down at the single human standing in the petitioner's circle. The circle was designed to make visitors feel small. It worked. Grand Arbiter Morzan of the Sindari leaned forward from his elevated throne. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he studied the human below. The Sindari had founded the Galactic Council 12 million years ago. They had seen empires rise and fall like waves on a beach. To them, humanity was barely a heartbeat old. Ambassador Cole, Morzan said. His voice echoed through translation devices that converted his words into every known language simultaneously. You have requested an emergency session of the full council. This is highly irregular. Explain yourself. David looked up at the assembled might of the galaxy. He was 53 years old. He had spent 30 of those years climbing through the ranks of Earth's diplomatic corps. He had negotiated with warlords and tyrants, with corporations and collectives. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. He took a breath. Grand Arbiter, David said. Distinguished representatives, I come before you today not to request anything. I come to inform you of a decision that has already been made. A ripple of confusion moved through the chamber. The Vorith delegation, insectoid warriors with armored shells and razor-sharp mandibles, clicked their disapproval. High Commander Drexel, their leader, rose from his seat. Inform us? Drexel's translated voice dripped with contempt. Humans do not inform the Council of anything. Humans ask permission. Humans request guidance. Humans beg for scraps from the table of their betters. Laughter spread through certain sections of the assembly. The Kreth merchant princes found this particularly amusing. Trade Master Valen, their chief representative, adjusted his ceremonial robes and smiled with too many teeth. Perhaps the mammal is confused, Valen said. Someone should explain to him how the galaxy works. David waited for the laughter to fade. His face showed nothing. His heart was pounding, but he had trained for decades to hide such things. When silence returned, he spoke again. 203 years ago, humanity joined this council. We were told it was the greatest honor our species could receive. We were told we would have a voice. We were told we would be equals. He paused. We were lied to. The laughter stopped. Grand Arbiter Morzan raised one of his 4 hands. Ambassador, you will control your tone. Such accusations are true, David interrupted. They are true, Grand Arbiter. In 203 years, humanity has never been granted a seat on a single committee. Our votes have been overruled on every resolution we have supported. Our technology has been classified as primitive, while being quietly copied by a dozen species. Our diplomats have been assigned to the most dangerous posts in the galaxy, while receiving none of the recognition. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small crystal chip. The chamber's sensors immediately projected its contents across every screen in the room. This is a formal notice of withdrawal. Effective immediately, the United Earth Federation resigns from the Galactic Council. All treaties are terminated. All obligations are concluded. All human personnel will evacuate council space within 30 standard days. For 3 heartbeats. There was absolute silence. Then the chamber exploded into chaos. Morzan slammed his ceremonial staff against his throne. The sound was like thunder, but it barely cut through the noise. Representatives were shouting in 100 languages. Some were demanding clarification. Others were laughing at what they assumed was a joke. A few were already calculating the economic implications. High Commander Drexel pushed through the Vorath delegation and descended toward the chamber floor. His warriors followed, their claws clicking on the crystalline stairs. "You cannot leave," Drexel snarled. "No species has ever left the Council. You are bound by the Founding Charter." David turned to face the approaching Vorath. He did not step back. Article 7 of the Founding Charter permits any member species to withdraw with proper notification. I have just provided that notification. Then we will refuse to accept it. "You cannot refuse," David said calmly. "The Charter is clear. Your own ancestors wrote it." Drexel stopped 3 meters away. He towered over the human ambassador by more than a foot. His mandibles were extended in what humans had learned to recognize as a threat display. "Without the Council's protection, your species will be conquered within a decade. The galaxy is not kind to the weak." David looked up at the massive warrior. Something strange happened to his expression. It was not fear. It was not anger. If Drexel had known humans better, he would have recognized it as pity. "High Commander," David said softly, "in 200 years, has your species ever fought a war against humanity? We have not needed to. You are beneath our notice. Then you have no idea what we are capable of." David turned away from the Vorath and addressed the full chamber once more. His voice carried to every corner of the vast space. "For 2 centuries, humanity has maintained your communication networks. We have staffed your research stations. We have mediated your conflicts and solved your problems. We have done this quietly, without recognition, because we believed that eventually you would see our worth." He shook his head slowly. "We were wrong. You see us as servants, as pets, as a young species too foolish to understand its place. So we are leaving. And when we are gone, you will discover exactly how much you needed us." Grand Arbiter Morzin finally regained control of the chamber. His voice cut through the remaining noise like a blade. "Ambassador Cole, I urge you to reconsider. Your species is making a terrible mistake. Without the Council, humanity will face the galaxy alone. You will have no allies, no trade, no protection." David walked toward the chamber's exit. His footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. "We have faced worse, Grand Arbiter. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. We have clawed our way up from caves to the stars. And we did it alone, without any help from you." He reached the doorway and paused. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper, but the chamber's acoustics carried it to every ear. "In 30 days, the last human leaves Council space. Use that time wisely. Ask yourselves what systems we maintained, what secrets we kept, what disasters we quietly prevented." He looked back one final time. "Then ask yourselves what happens when we stop." The doors closed behind him, in orbit above the Judgment Chamber. Admiral Rebecca Cross received confirmation that the message had been delivered. She activated the fleet-wide communication channel. "All ships, this is Cross. Operation Exodus is a go. Begin evacuation procedures." Across Council space, on 1,000 worlds and stations, human personnel received the signal. They saved their work. They backed up their files. They said goodbye to colleagues who did not yet understand what was happening, and they began to leave Dot in the Judgment Chamber. The chaos continued. But Speaker Pelax of the Mendari, a telepathic species known for their sensitivity to emotions, sat very still. He had tried to read the human ambassador's thoughts during the confrontation. He had failed. For the first time in his long life, he had encountered a mind he could not penetrate. Not because it was empty, but because it was shielded disciplined, controlled, in ways that should have been impossible. For such a young species, Pelax leaned over to his aide and whispered a single sentence. "We have made a terrible mistake." The lights flickered on station. Nexus-Prime Dot. It was a small thing. A brief dimming that lasted less than a second. Most of the station's inhabitants did not notice. But Chief Engineer Gralax of the Kref noticed. He had maintained this station for 40 years, and the lights had never flickered before. He pulled up the diagnostic systems and began running checks. Everything appeared normal. Power generation was stable. Distribution networks were functioning. But something had changed, something subtle that his instruments could not quite identify. Gralax dismissed the anomaly and returned to his work. He would remember this moment later, when everything began to fall apart. 15 days had passed since humanity's resignation. Across council space, the evacuation was proceeding with frightening efficiency. Human workers were departing from research facilities, communication hubs, and diplomatic posts. They left behind neat records of their work, careful documentation of their responsibilities, and a growing sense of unease among the species who had never realized how much humans had been doing. Grand Arbiter Morzin convened an emergency session of the Inner Council, the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy. They met in a smaller chamber, away from the chaos of the full assembly. "The situation is under control," Trade Master Valen insisted. Humans performed minor roles throughout council space. Their departure will cause temporary inconveniences, nothing more. High Commander Drexel made a sound of agreement. Let them go. They were never important. In a year, they will come crawling back, begging for readmission. But Consular Tussex of the Arani, a species known for their caution and foresight, shook his head slowly. "I am not so certain. My analysts have been studying the records humans left behind. The results are disturbing." Morzin gestured for Tussex to continue. "The Galactic Communication Network," Tussex said. "The system that allows all council species to speak to one another. It was designed by humans 50 years ago. They have maintained it ever since. No other species fully understands how it works." "Then we will learn," Valen said dismissively. "In 30 days?" Tussex asked. "With the humans already gone?" "Our best engineers estimate it would take decades to reverse engineer the system. And that assumes nothing goes wrong in the meantime." The chamber fell silent. Commander Diana Frost stood on the observation deck of Research Station Omega-7, watching her team load the last cargo containers onto the evacuation shuttles. The station floated in orbit around a dying star, a location chosen for its unique radiation patterns. For 60 years, human scientists had worked here alongside researchers from a dozen species. None of those species had ever asked what the humans were actually studying. Station Director Palax, a Kreth scientist with more curiosity than most of his kind, approached Diana with a troubled expression. "Commander Frost, my team has discovered something concerning. The atmospheric recycling system. It appears to be running on protocols we do not recognize." Diana nodded. She had expected this conversation. "That is correct, Director. The original system was failing 8 years ago. Our engineers rebuilt it from scratch. We filed the appropriate reports. We never received any reports." "I know. They were classified as routine maintenance and filtered out of your notification queue. Standard procedure for minor technical improvements." Palax stared at her. "Minor? Without atmosphere recycling, this station would become uninhabitable within days." Diana handed him a data chip. "This contains complete documentation of every system we modified. I suggest you study it carefully. You have approximately 6 hours before the last human leaves this station." She walked toward the shuttle bay, leading Palax holding the chip with trembling hands. When he finally accessed its contents, he found records of over 300 critical systems that human engineers had quietly rebuilt, improved, or completely redesigned over the past 6 decades. Systems that kept the station running. Systems that no one else knew how to maintain. On the Council homeworld, Speaker Pelax of the Mendari sought a private audience with Grand Arbiter Morzon. The telepathic representative was troubled in ways he could not easily explain. "I have been attempting to contact the departing human fleet," Pelax said. "I wish to understand their intentions, to perhaps find a path toward reconciliation." Morzon leaned forward. "And I cannot read them? Not their ambassador, not their military commanders, not even their common workers. Their minds are shielded behind walls of discipline I have never encountered. It is as if they have been training for this moment their entire lives. Training to leave? Training to hide." Pelax's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "Grand Arbiter, I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood this species. We assumed they were primitive because they were young. But what if they are not primitive at all? What if they have been hiding their true capabilities from us deliberately?" Morzon dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "You give them too much credit. Humans are clever, yes, but they lack the resources and the history to compete with established powers. Their departure is a tantrum, nothing more." "I hope you are right," Pelax said quietly. "I fear you are not." Day 25 brought the first major failure. The communication relay at Junction Point 7, a critical hub that connected 3 major trade routes, went offline without warning. Technicians were dispatched, but they could not identify the problem. The system's core programming was written in a language. None of them recognized Dot. It was human code. Custom-built, highly efficient, and completely undocumented in any council database. Trade Master Valen received the news while hosting a diplomatic dinner. His face went pale beneath his scales. Junction Point 7 handled 40% of the Kreth Consortium's shipping traffic. Without it, goods would be delayed by weeks. Contracts would be broken. Profits would be lost. "Find someone who can fix this," he ordered his assistant. The only people who understood that system were the human maintenance crew. They departed 3 days ago. On the Vorath military flagship, High Commander Drexel faced a different kind of problem. His tactical coordination system, the network that allowed his fleet to operate as a single unified force, was experiencing what the technicians called degradation. Response times were slowing. Navigation calculations were becoming less accurate. Weapons targeting was drifting outside acceptable parameters. "Explain this to me," Drexel demanded. "These systems have functioned perfectly for 2 centuries. His chief technician, a young officer named Korvax, studied the diagnostic reports with growing alarm. "High Commander, these systems were optimized by human mathematicians 80 years ago. They improved efficiency by 300%. But the improvements were made at a level of complexity our engineers do not fully understand. The systems are still functioning, but without regular maintenance, they are slowly reverting to their original, less efficient states. How long until they fail completely? Months. Perhaps a year. Perhaps less." Day 30 arrived like a sentence being carried out. Ambassador David Cole stood on the bridge of the transport vessel Exodus, the last human ship in council space. Behind him, through the observation windows, he could see the border, an invisible line that marked the edge of council jurisdiction. On the other side lay territory that humanity had claimed during their 2 centuries of quiet expansion. Territory the council did not know about. Resources the council had never cataloged. Allies the council had never contacted. The communication system crackled. It was Grand Arbiter Morzon, his voice carrying a tone David had never heard before. Something close to desperation. "Ambassador Cole, I am authorized to offer concessions. Expanded committee membership. Favorable trade terms. and a formal recognition of humanity's contributions to council affairs. Surely we can find a compromise. David looked at the border ahead. Then he looked back at the council space he was leaving behind. 200 years ago, Councillor Tessix's predecessor proposed treating humanity as equal partners. Your predecessor called it a waste of resources. 60 years ago, Tessix himself suggested reforming the committee system to give younger species a voice. You dismissed it as unnecessary disruption. He paused. You have had 2 centuries to compromise. The time for compromise is over. He nodded to his pilot. The ship's engines engaged, and the Exodus crossed the border into human space. Behind them, the Council's communication network experienced a cascade failure. Relays went dark across 3 sectors. Navigation beacons lost synchronization. Emergency systems activated on 1,000 stations. Systems that had been installed by human engineers and maintained by human technicians. Systems that no one else knew how to operate. In the Judgment Chamber, Grand Arbiter Morzin received status reports from across council space. Each one was worse than the last. He sat alone on his throne, staring at a galaxy that was slowly beginning to fall apart. And somewhere beyond the border, the humans were watching, waiting. Planning what came next. 6 months after humanity left, the galaxy began to burn. The war between the Vorth Empire and the Mendari Collective had been building for centuries. Old grudges, territorial disputes, and cultural hatred had simmered beneath the surface of council politics for generations. But the wars had never happened. Conflicts had always been resolved, at the last moment through careful negotiation and diplomatic intervention that no one had ever asked. Who was doing the negotiating? High. Commander Drexel led his fleet into Mendari space on a clear morning by Galactic Standard Time. His ships were the finest in the Vorith arsenal, massive warbirds bristling with weapons and filled with warriors eager for glory. They expected a swift victory. They found a trap. The Mendari had been preparing for this war for decades. They had hidden defense platforms throughout the border region. They had developed weapons specifically designed to penetrate Vorith armor. And they had done something else, something that changed everything. They had studied human tactical doctrine. In the archives of a forgotten human diplomatic post. A Mendari intelligence officer had discovered records of human military history. Battles fought on a small blue world across thousands of years. Strategies developed by commanders named Alexander and Hannibal and Rommel and countless others. The Mendari had spent 6 months learning from these records. Drexel's fleet walked into an ambush that used tactics the Vorith had never seen. Flanking maneuvers, false retreats, coordinated strikes from multiple angles. Within hours, the greatest Vorith armada in 5 centuries was scattered and broken. Drexel survived. He retreated to Vorith space with less than a quarter of his original force, his pride shattered and his reputation destroyed. But the damage was done. The war had begun, and neither side would stop until the other was destroyed. On the Council homeworld, Grand Arbiter Morzin faced a chamber that was half empty. 3 minor species had already withdrawn from the Council, citing loss of confidence. A dozen others were threatening to follow. The Luminari, ancient beings of pure energy who had observed galactic affairs for millions of years, had retreated to their home dimension and refused all communication. We must restore order, Morzin declared. The Council has weathered crises before. We will weather this one. But even as he spoke, his words rang hollow. The Council's authority had always rested on 2 pillars: military power and economic stability. Both were crumbling. Trade. Master Valen sat in his private quarters, surrounded by financial reports that painted a picture of disaster. The Kreth economic network, the most sophisticated in the galaxy, was collapsing. Without human trade ships acting as data carriers, communication between markets was delayed by days. Without human engineers maintaining the processing centers, transactions were failing. Without human analysts predicting market trends, investments were going wrong. The Kref had built their empire on trade. Now that empire was falling apart. Valen tried to contact the human government directly. He offered favorable terms. He promised concessions. He was willing to give humanity anything they wanted. His message was refused at the border. On Earth, a very different scene was unfolding. The United Earth Federation had spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment. While the Council dismissed them as primitives, humans had been building, expanding, developing technologies that made Council systems look ancient. Admiral Rebecca Cross stood before the Earth Defense Council, presenting her latest report. Behind her, holographic displays showed the current state of human space. It was vast. It was thriving. And it was growing every day. Our territorial claims now exceed Council projections by 400%, Cross reported. We have established diplomatic relations with over 30 species who are blacklisted or ignored by the Council. Our technological development has accelerated by a factor of 10 since the withdrawal. Secretary General Arthur Webb listened carefully. He was a patient man, a quality that had served him well during the long years of preparation. But even he was surprised by how quickly the Council had fallen apart. What about the Vorath-Mendari conflict? Escalating. Both sides have committed their full military forces. Conservative estimates suggest the war will continue for at least another year, possibly longer. Neither side has the resources or the will to seek peace. And the Council's response? Ineffective. Grand Arbiter Morzin has called for ceasefires 3 times. Both sides have ignored him. Without human diplomats serving as mediators, there is no one the Vorath and Mendari trust enough to negotiate. Webb nodded slowly. Monitor the situation. Prepare humanitarian aid packages for civilian populations in the war zone. But do not intervene directly. Not yet. In a secret laboratory on Earth's moon, Dr. Thomas Reeve worked on the project that would define humanity's future. He was the chief architect of human technological independence. A brilliant scientist who had spent decades quietly developing systems that exceeded anything in the Council's arsenal. His current project was communications. The Council's network had been designed by humans, but it was limited by Council specifications. Reeves' new system was something else entirely. Quantum entangled nodes that allowed instantaneous communication across any distance. No delays, no interference, no possibility of interception. A soft chime announced a visitor. Reeve looked up to see a being of shimmering light enter his laboratory. She called herself Flickering Dawn, a young luminary who had secretly traveled to Earth seeking asylum. Dr. Reeve, Dawn said, the elders have made their decision. They will not intervene in Council affairs. They believe the galaxy must learn its own lessons. Reeve set down his tools. And you? What do you believe? I believe the Council was wrong about humanity. I believe your species has something the galaxy needs. She paused, her light shifting to deeper colors. I believe I want to help. Reeve smiled. Then let me show you what we are building. 3 months later, the Harrow arrived. They came from beyond the galactic rim, from regions of space the Council had never explored. They were conquerors, a species that had spent millennia consuming other civilizations. They took what they wanted and destroyed what remained. For 50 years, humanity's deep space fleet had been holding them at the edge of the galaxy. Quiet battles fought in the darkness between stars. Wars that no one else knew about. Humanity had kept the Harrow at bay through sacrifice and determination, through tactics and technology, through sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Now the humans were gone. And the Harrow had noticed. Their invasion fleet crossed into council space like a tide of destruction. The first species they encountered were the Palari, a peaceful civilization of philosophers and artists. The Palari had no military. They had relied on council protection for 10,000 years. Council protection did not come. The Harrow consumed the Palari homeworld in 3 days. Then they moved on to the next system. And the next. And the next. Grand Arbiter Morzin received reports of the invasion while the Vorath-Mendari War still raged. He called an emergency session of the full council, but only half the representatives answered. Many were too busy with their own crises. Others had simply lost faith in the council's ability to respond. "We must unite," Morzin pleaded. "We must put aside our differences and face this threat together." High Commander Drexel, bloodied but still defiant, rose to speak. "The Vorath Empire will defend itself. We do not need the Council's help." "The Vorath Empire is already at war," Councillor Tessix pointed out. "You cannot fight on 2 fronts. Then we will make peace with the Mendari. How? There is no one to mediate. Every diplomat we send is rejected. Every ceasefire we propose is ignored." Tessix turned to face the chamber. "We needed the humans. We drove them away. And now we are paying the price." The chamber erupted into arguments. Species blamed each other. Old alliances fractured. The Council, which had stood for 12 million years, was tearing itself apart. And somewhere beyond the border, Ambassador David Cole watched the reports come in. He felt no satisfaction in the Council's collapse. He felt only a deep, weary sadness. "They are going to destroy themselves," he said quietly. Secretary General Webb stood beside him, studying the same reports. "Yes, they are. Do we help them?" Webb was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision he was about to make. "Not yet, but soon." He turned to face the stars. "When they are ready to listen, we will be there. But this time, we will be equals. Or we will be nothing at all." In the distance, beyond the border, the Harrow fleet continued its advance. The galaxy held its breath, and humanity waited. The diplomatic vessel limped through the darkness of space, its hull scarred by weapons fire, and its engines barely functioning. Inside, Grand Arbiter Morzin sat in a cabin that had once belonged to a king. Now it felt like a prison cell. 12 months had passed since humanity's departure. 12 months of war and collapse and destruction. The Harrow had consumed 40% of Council territory. The Vorath-Mendari conflict had killed billions. The economic networks had failed completely. Species that had been Council members for millions of years were scattered as refugees across the galaxy. And now, Morzin was traveling to Earth, not as a ruler coming to negotiate. As a beggar coming to plead, the ship crossed the border into human space without resistance. Morzin had expected to be stopped, questioned, perhaps turned away. Instead, human patrol vessels simply acknowledged the diplomatic codes and allowed them to pass. What he saw on the other side of the border made his 4 hearts stop. The Sol System, humanity's home, had been transformed. Orbital habitats circled every planet, structures of gleaming metal and crystal that dwarfed anything in Council space. Shipyards produced vessels by the hundreds, craft that moved with a speed and grace that Morzin had never witnessed. Defense platforms monitored every approach, their weapons capable of destroying fleets with single shots. This was not the primitive homeworld he had expected. This was an empire. High Commander Drexel stood beside Morzin, his once proud bearing broken by months of defeat. Trade Master Valen stared out the viewport with an expression of pure shock. Councillor Tessix remained calm, but even he could not hide his amazement. "They lied to us," Drexel whispered. "For 200 years, they let us believe they were weak." "No," Tessix said quietly. We assumed they were weak. They simply did not correct us. The diplomatic vessel was escorted to a station orbiting Earth's moon. There, the council delegation was met by a human officer with cold eyes and a formal manner. "Welcome to Sol Station," the officer said. "Secretary General Webb will receive you in 3 hours. You will be given quarters to rest and refresh yourselves." Morzin stepped forward. "We wish to speak with Ambassador Cole." "Ambassador Cole has retired from diplomatic service. He sends his regrets." The delegation was led through corridors filled with busy humans and alien species, faces Morzin did not recognize. He saw luminary energy forms working alongside solid beings. He saw representatives from species the Council had declared extinct centuries ago. He saw civilizations he had never encountered. "Who are these people?" Valen asked their escort. "Our allies. Species the Council rejected, ignored, or tried to destroy. They came to us for help. We gave it." The meeting chamber was unlike anything in Council architecture. It was circular, with seating arranged in rings where everyone faced the center. No tiers, no elevated thrones. No positions of dominance. Secretary General Arthur Webb stood at the center, a calm figure in simple clothing. Behind him, displayed on massive screens, were images of the galaxy in crisis. Burning worlds, refugee fleets, Harrow warships advancing through Council space. "Grand Arbiter Morzin," Webb said. "Welcome to Earth." Morzin lowered his head in a gesture that his species reserved for equals. It was the first time he had ever done so to a human. "Secretary General, I come before you with a request. The Council faces extinction. The Harrow are unstoppable. Our military is shattered. Our economies have collapsed. Our species are dying by the billions." He paused, his voice breaking. "We need your help." Webb studied the Sindari leader for a long moment. His face revealed nothing. "For 200 years, humanity served the Council faithfully. We maintained your systems. We mediated your conflicts. We protected your borders from threats you never knew existed. In return, we received contempt. We were mocked in your chambers, denied representation in your committees, treated as children who should be grateful for the privilege of serving their betters." Morzin flinched at each word. "Now you come to us with your hand outstretched, asking us to save you from the consequences of your own arrogance." Webb walked slowly around the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "Give me one reason why we should." It was Trade Master Valen who spoke first. "Because we can pay. The Kreth Consortium has vast resources. Name your price, and we will meet it." Webb shook his head. "We do not want your money." High Commander Drexel stepped forward. "Then military alliance. The Vorath Empire will pledge its remaining forces to human command. We will serve as your warriors. The same warriors who called us prey animals, who laughed when we asked for respect." Webb turned to face Drexel directly. "We do not want your service." Counselor Tessix spoke softly. "Then what do you want?" Webb was silent for a long moment. Then he touched a control, and the screens behind him changed. They showed a document, simple and elegant, written in every language of the galaxy. "We want equality, not granted as a favor, but recognized as a right. We want a new order, built on cooperation instead of hierarchy. We want a galaxy where no species is dismissed because of its age, where no civilization is exploited because of its size." He turned to face the delegation. "We want what we asked for 200 years ago. Nothing more. Nothing less." Morzin stared at the document. It was called the Charter of the Galactic Alliance. Its principles were everything the Council had denied humanity for 2 centuries. Equal representation, fair trade, mutual defense, shared knowledge. If we sign this, Morzin said slowly. The council ends. The council is already over, Webb replied. This is what comes next. In a private chamber, far from the formal negotiations, David Cole met with an unexpected visitor. Speaker Pelax of the Mindari, the telepath who had first sensed that humanity was hiding something, had requested a personal audience. I owed you an apology, Pelax said. I knew something was different about your species. I should have spoken louder. David sat across from the telepathic being, his face showing the weariness of decades. Would they have listened? No, but I should have tried harder. Pelax's multiple eyes studied the human ambassador. You could have let us fall. You could have watched us destroy ourselves, and then claimed the remains. Why are you offering to help? David was quiet for a long time before answering. Because we are not like you, he said finally. We do not measure our worth by the suffering of others. We do not find satisfaction in revenge. He looked out the window at the stars beyond. We left because we had to. We are returning because it is right. Even after everything we did to you, especially after everything you did to us. The galaxy needs to learn a different way. Someone has to teach it. In the main chamber, the negotiations continued through the night. Terms were debated. Provisions were argued. But slowly, piece by piece, an agreement took shape. Admiral Rebecca Cross brought intelligence reports showing the current position of the Harrow fleet. They were 3 months from reaching Council Core worlds. 3 months from complete victory. If you sign the charter today, Cross said, we can have a combined fleet ready to engage the Harrow within 6 weeks. Human ships, Vorath warriors, Kreth logistics, Mindari coordination. The first truly unified force in galactic history. Morzin looked at the other members of his delegation. Valen was calculating profits and losses. Drexel was imagining battles to come. Tessix was simply watching with an expression that might have been hope. And if we refuse? Morzin asked. Cross met his gaze without flinching. Then we will defend our own borders. What happens beyond them will no longer be our concern. The silence stretched. Morzin reached for the charter with trembling hands. 12 million years of council history. 12 million years of tradition and hierarchy and assumed superiority. All of it ending with a single signature. His pen touched the document, and at the edge of human space, sensor stations detected the first Harrow scouts entering the outer system. The clock had started. The Battle of the Threshold began at dawn by Earth Standard Time. Though in space there was no dawn, only the endless black between stars and the fires of war. Admiral Rebecca Cross stood on the bridge of the flagship Unity, the largest vessel ever constructed by human hands. Around her, filling every screen and every sensor display, was the combined fleet of the Galactic Alliance. Human destroyers flew in formation with Vorath battlecruisers. Kreth supply ships provided logistics for Mindari communication vessels. And at the heart of the formation, moving like ghosts of light, were the Luminari, who had finally emerged from their dimension to fight alongside the younger. Species. It was the first time in galactic history that so many civilizations had fought as one. The Harrow fleet appeared on sensors like a storm approaching shore. Thousands of ships, each one a weapon of conquest that had destroyed entire civilizations. Their commander, Warlord Shirak, had never known defeat. He had consumed worlds without number. He expected this battle to be no different. He was wrong. All ships, this is Admiral Cross, Rebecca's voice, carried across the fleet-wide communication network. The Harrow have taken 40% of Council space. They have killed billions. They believe we are weak, divided, and ready to fall. She paused. Show them what happens when the galaxy stands together. The battle unfolded in phases, each one designed to use the unique strengths of different species. Vorath warriors, trained for generations in the art of ship-to-ship combat, formed the front line. They absorbed the Harrow's initial assault with shields hardened by human technology and courage refined by centuries of martial tradition. As the Vorath held the line, Mendari telepaths coordinated the fleet's movements with perfect precision. Every ship knew what every other ship was doing. Every captain anticipated every order. The coordination was seamless in ways the Harrow had never encountered. Human tactical teams guided the overall strategy, drawing on lessons learned from 10,000 years of warfare on their homeworld. Flanking maneuvers, feints and counterattacks. The careful application of force at exactly the right moment. And when the moment came, the luminary struck. Elder Radiance had returned from the dimension where the ancient beings had retreated. She was not alone. 1,000 luminari moved through the Harrow formation like fire through dry grass. Their energy forms disrupted systems, overloaded weapons, and created chaos where the Harrow expected order. Warlord Sharak watched his fleet begin to break apart. For the first time in his long career of conquest, he felt something he did not recognize. Fear. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, the Harrow fleet was shattered. Their surviving ships scattered into the void, fleeing from the galaxy they had expected to conquer. Warlord Sharak's flagship was captured intact, its commander taken prisoner by a boarding team of human marines, and Vorath warriors fighting side by side. When Rebecca Cross received the final reports, she allowed herself a single moment of relief. Then she turned to her crew. The war is not over. The Harrow still hold occupied territory. Billions of people still need rescue. But today, we proved something. She looked at the diverse faces around her, human and alien, former enemies now allies. We proved that the galaxy can change. 1 year later, the Galactic Alliance was formally established. The ceremony was held on Earth, in a great hall built specifically for this purpose. Representatives from 412 species filled the circular chamber, each delegation equal in position and voice. There were no tiers, no thrones, no hierarchy. Secretary General Arthur Webb stood at the center, his voice amplified to reach every ear. We gather today not to celebrate victory, but to remember its cost. The council fell because it forgot a simple truth, that every species, no matter how young or small, has something to contribute. That diversity is strength, not weakness. That the galaxy belongs to all of us. He gestured to the diverse assembly around him. The alliance is built on different principles. Equal representation for all members. Fair trade that benefits everyone. Mutual defense against common threats. And most importantly, respect for every voice, every culture, every perspective. He paused, his eyes moving across the chamber. Humanity did not seek to lead the galaxy. We sought only to belong to it. When we were denied that belonging, we left. Now we have returned, not as conquerors, but as partners. The Alliance is not a human empire. It is a shared future. In the audience, David Cole watched the ceremony with quiet satisfaction. He was 70 years old now, retired from diplomatic service, content to observe the world he had helped create. Beside him sat Speaker Pelax, who had become his unlikely friend during the years of conflict and reconciliation. "You must be proud," Pelax said. David shook his head slowly. "Pride is for those who sought glory. I sought only justice. This is not my accomplishment. It belongs to everyone who refused to accept the way things were." After the ceremony, a smaller gathering was held in an observation lounge overlooking the Earth below. Representatives who had once been enemies shared drinks and conversation. High Commander Drexel, now simply General Drexel, spoke with human military officers about joint training exercises. Trade Master Valen discussed economic partnerships with species he had once exploited. Grand Arbiter Morzen, who had signed away the Council's existence, approached David Cole with a formal bow. "Ambassador Cole," Morzen said, "I owe you an apology that words cannot adequately express." David looked at the former ruler of the galaxy. He saw not arrogance, but humility. Not condescension, but genuine regret. "You were not uniquely cruel," David said. "You simply followed traditions that had existed for millions of years. The crime was in the system, not the individual. Yet I could have changed the system. I chose not to. Yes, and that choice had consequences." David met the Sindari's four-eyed gaze directly. "But you signed the charter. You helped build the alliance. You chose differently when it mattered most. That is worth something." Morzen was silent for a long moment. Then he extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship, a gesture he had learned only recently. "Thank you for giving us another chance." David shook the offered hand. "Thank you for taking it." 5 years later, David Cole stood on the observation deck of Concord Prime, the station that had once housed the Council's judgment chamber. The chamber itself had been converted into a memorial, its tiered seating preserved as a reminder of what the galaxy had been. A young human diplomat approached him, a woman named Lieutenant Commander Sarah Vance, who had just received her first assignment. "Sir, the Alliance Council is convening. They are asking if you would like to address the assembly." David smiled and shook his head. "I gave enough speeches in my time. This moment belongs to your generation." He walked slowly along the observation deck, looking out at the stars. So many of them were now connected by the Alliance's communication network. So many worlds that had once been isolated or oppressed were now thriving members of a galactic community. "Sir?" Vance asked. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you believe humanity could change the galaxy?" "We were so young, so small. Everyone said we did not matter." David was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft with memory. "Because we survived. Ice ages and plagues and wars, famines and disasters, and our own worst impulses. 100,000 years of struggle on a small blue world at the edge of the galaxy. We survived it all." He turned to face the young diplomat. "The Council thought that made us primitive. They were wrong. It made us strong. Strong enough to endure their contempt. Strong enough to leave when we had to. Strong enough to return when it was right." He looked back at the stars. "They forgot what we are. We are the species that looked at the impossible and said not impossible for us. We are the species that reached for the stars when we could barely reach for the sky. We are the species that never, ever gives up." He smiled, and there was pride in his eyes at last. "They pushed us down, Lieutenant Commander. They dismissed us. They laughed at us. They told us we were nothing." He began walking toward the memorial chamber, toward the future that humanity had helped build. "They forgot the most important thing about us." Vance followed him. "What is that, sir?" David Cole paused at the threshold and looked back at her one final time. "When you push us down, we always get back up." He walked into the chamber, where the Alliance Council was gathering to write the next chapter of galactic history. And humanity walked with him.